good evening. I'm Melissa Idris, and you're watching Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Today, we're discussing the issue of student loan debt in Malaysia. In recent decades, student loans have been the primary way to finance one's higher education. But is it the most sustainable way? And might there be reforms to higher education financing and policy interventions that can help alleviate some of the burden borrowers carry from student loan debt? Joining me on the show today, I have Kok Hin. He is a research manager at the think tank The Centre. Kok Hin, thank you for joining me on the show today. I'm hoping to begin our conversation with an overview of the issues of student debt. Can you broadly explain why you think policymakers should pay attention to the issues surrounding student loan debt and higher education financing in Malaysia? Because I know you, as a researcher, have been looking into this topic for the past few years. So tell us, what are your key concerns?
First of all, thank you, Melissa, for having me on the show. Let me just quickly list 4 reasons why I think policymakers should pay attention to this matter of student loan debt. Not just because of what's going on in the United States, but also because of what's going on here in Malaysia. So, first reason, student debt is actually the second most common debt that is held by Malaysians youth age, about 20 years old to 29 years old. This is according to AKPK, the Agency Council Pengurusan Kewangan, in 2018. So the average debt held by student loan borrowers depends on the type of courses you take, institutions that you study, IPTA or IPTS, right? Private or public. So for an average degree holder, if you borrow the student loan to study at a private institution, it will cost you about 56,000 ringgit. And for a undergraduate studying in IPTA for your 4-year degree, it will cost you about 26,000 ringgit. So that's the loan that you will, about half of students who enroll in tertiary education actually took out the loans to finance their education. So you're looking at people who are accumulating 5-figure debt before they even earn their first salary. So that's a big problem, right? You're entering the labor force with just this huge amount of debt on your shoulders. Second reason, this issue disproportionately affects the B40, the lowest bottom 40 households. So PTPTN itself, in their data, claimed that about 97% of the defaulters they surveyed were from the B40 families, right? So uh, overall, not just defaulters, overall about 55% of the borrowers came from B40 households. So that shows you that this issue disproportionately impact the B40. The third issue, which is perhaps more important, beyond, it does not affect just student loan borrowers or people who are lending out the money, but it's about our nation. It's because PTPTN require about RM 6 billion every year to sustain and operate. Why 6 billion? They need about 4.5 billion every year, about 3 or 4 billion, right? Sometimes more, to finance new allocation, because every year we have students who are going into higher education. So approximately between 150K to 180K new loans every year. So they need about 4 billions, right? And on top of that, they continuously pay interest on the debt that they accrue, which we'll get into later. Many people may not be aware that PTPTN does not receive direct grant from the government to finance new loan allocation. They actually borrow from banks, financial institutions such as MBank, Maybank, Afing, CIMB, and also EPF through either loans or sukuk issuance, right? So this is something we'll get into later. This debt currently about 40 billion right now, and they are guaranteed by the federal government. Are we looking at a too big to fail scenario coming soon? According to their own projection, right? In 20 years, if nothing changes, if we go as is, the current policies, the debt is expected to reach 76 billion in 20 years. 76 billion in 20 years. That tells you that it's going to be a bigger issue than 1 MDB if it's not addressed right now. Let me give you the fourth reason, which I think is the lead for, since you're heading into GA15 in less than a year. We have Undi 18, right? And we have automatic voter registration. We are looking at approximately 6 million new voters. That's an addition about 40% of registered voters. a huge chunk of these new voters are affected by this issue of student loan, and higher education is close to their interests at heart. If policymakers and politicians were to court their interests, were to court their votes, you have to address this issue which is close to their interests and heart. So I think that this is a big reason why policymakers should pay attention to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've laid it out for us quite well. All four issues really important for us to kind of unpack as much as we can in the show today. Let's focus on issue number 2, the B40, disproportionate impact of the B40 students who take student loan debt. You recently, or about a year ago, you wrote a piece, four-part article, four-part research paper on the issue of student loan debt, titled Indebted Generation. In it, if I may quote you, Colin, you said that student debt is unique for a generation of Malaysians. I was struck by that, and I'm quite curious as to understand why this is so, and who in this cohort beyond the B40, if you can unpack that a little bit more, who are most impacted by this debt?
First of all, I would like to give credit to my colleagues at the center as well, Edwin, Neil, Kyril. They have contributed to this as well. Of course, I started it as part of my own research, and they contributed in the end. We wrote that it's common and unique to this generation. Common because, everyone knows someone who took out student loans. We are talking about PTPTN loans here because it's the majority, but there are also other loans like Mara loans, right? It's common, it's pervasive, but it's unique. Why? Because despite being so pervasive, it's actually a new phenomenon. We are looking at it maybe the past 30 years. PTPTN was established in the late 90s. Before that, we do have loans, but it's not on such a scale. We're talking about like almost 200,000 people getting loans every year just to go to university. This is something that's striking to me at the beginning of my research. For example, even in the UK, the tuition fees are actually introduced by Tony Blair's Labour government in the 90s. It was not a thing before the 90s. If you tell someone, whether in Malaysia or UK in the 80s, that you should take 30,000 loan debt just to go to higher education, people would think you are crazy, right? Or you are Milton Friedman, neoliberal, whatnot. But now it's so pervasive, it's so normal. So it's sometimes things become so normalized that we don't perceive it as a problem because everybody do it. But as I hope that I have convinced you guys earlier that this problematic approach and requires a huge reform overhaul, not just piecemeal announcement here and there, which actually does not solve anything in my view. I mean, we can get into that later. I would also like to point out that a recent statistics I read. If you are from a low income family, there are higher chances of you getting unemployed after graduation, right? So compared to if you come from a high income family, if you come from a low income family, you have about 10 percentage point higher to be unemployed after you graduate. So this is a problem that I think, especially now because we know COVID recovery, COVID lockdowns. So we are this issue becoming more serious because graduates do not earn as much as they should compared to the past. If you graduate in the 80s, confirm you dapat kerja, confirm you dapat gaji yang bagus. It's not the case now. We have people, borrowing 30,000 ringgit, 4 year studies. Of what they do at the end, they did a food panda delivery, bawa Grab and so on. I'm not saying these are not good jobs. I'm saying that this is not what they sign up for,
Right.
and this is not, this is not a promise that the nation should. I think.
Yeah, well, it's not commensurate to the level of study, right? It's underemployment. I want to touch on the issue of PTPTN because you're absolutely right. I wasn't aware until very recently when I did an interview with PTPTN. I wasn't aware that PTPTN was borrowing at a higher interest rate from financial markets and lending at a lower rate to students. So this model feels like it is unsustainable from the get-go. So now that PTPTN since 1997 has become the primary financing model for one's higher education, how then do we think about it? Is PTPTN in its conception, is that flawed, and how do we address some of the issues, some of the areas of concern.
Right. So, to answer this question, we have to go down the history route a little bit. So, PTPTN was started in the late 90s, actually as a result of the Malaysia Incorporated policy by Tun Dr. Mahathir in the past, whereby the government is trying to reduce public spending, right? They're trying to control the deficit and whatnot. So, what they're trying to do is, okay, rather than giving money to students or subsidizing tuition fees, which they still do now, but maybe on a lesser scale compared to in the proportionally in the 80s and 70s. So they create an agency to centralize all the loan distribution. In the first few years of PTPTN's establishment, they actually received direct grants from the government. So we had no issue about interest here. After a while, but I think about within 5 years or less, the PTPTN chairman at the time, which is a former Minister of Finance too, Dr. Syed Ahmad Husni, he went to EPF to borrow money for PTPTN to continue sustain. And that starts, that kicks into motion what we have today after EPF sort of, I think borrowed them a huge sum of money. After that, they resorted to borrow from banks. And after that, they also issue sukuk bonds and so on. So it becomes continuously. So let me give you an example. You were talking about the percentages difference, which is, I think, something that is important. PTPTN borrow from the financial institutions, banks, and so on, at about, I think, 4 to 5, sometimes 6%, and they lend to students at about 1 to 2%. It does not take, rocket science to figure out that this is a systemic problem. The gap between the interest rate that you're paying and the one that you are accruing and the one that you are lending and so on. So it creates a problem, and that's something that I hope that we're going to get at, which is the problem of PTPT and student loan debt is not just about borrowers' mindset, borrowers tak nak bayar. They have some systemic policy design here and also socio-economic conditions that are beyond individual faults and so on. So I think that's hopefully that addressed your question.
Yes, definitely. We're going to take a quick break, Kok Hin, but let's come back and continue this conversation. A lot of ground to cover in this issue, but we will come back to some of the key points in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned to consider this. Hi, thanks so much for staying with me on Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. My guest today is Ooi Kok Hin. He is a research manager at the think tank The Centre. We are discussing the issue of student loan debt to Malaysia and the need to reform the ways in which higher education is financed. Kok Hin, let's come back to what you talked about a little bit earlier. That is, students go into the workplace already with 5-figure debt, and often they don't get a job within the first 6 months or even a year. How do we think about this, addressing the diminishing returns of higher education? How accurate is it that social mobility is no longer guaranteed with tertiary education, and what impact is that when a student takes a 5-figure loan to finance a 4-year education?
Mm-hmm. I think you mentioned the keyword right there, diminishing returns on higher education. In the past, if you invest in higher education, almost confirm, right? You're gonna get a return. Now we have, is social upward mobility is not guaranteed when you trying to attain higher education. So we actually did conduct a few, interviews and as well as survey with student loan borrowers. And a couple of themes that we found is actually borrowers from low income families tend to choose student loans as the default option to go to higher education, to pay for the higher education. Uh, Partly because they don't have money, and another reason which is quite interesting is because they experience what we call information asymmetry, as in they lack the know-how, they lack the resources, they lack the people to tell them, okay, these are actually other financial aid opportunities that you can get, how to apply for scholarships and so on, interview skills, these are something that they lack. We also found that many graduates actually suffer anxiety when in the initial period when they graduate and they don't have a job yet. They are actually quite scared of what am I going to do with my degree? What am I, have I wasted 4 years of my life? Have I Is it a loss occurring 40,000 ringgit debt just for a degree that I'm not getting a job now? Now we have to remember that, especially in the past 2 3 years, but also before the pandemic, graduates tend to take quite some time to land a job. After they graduate, we can get into the you mentioned about perception, whether it's true. I'm going to mention some numbers here, statistic, just so that we're not merely talking about perception, but also numbers, right? So from DOSM, the Department of Statistics Malaysia, we know that the median wage for workers with graduate degrees, right, higher education, uh, for fresh grads, they actually, in the latest statistic, they are actually earning about 1,590 ringgit. 1,590 ringgit for fresh grads below 24 years old with tertiary education. Can you imagine that 1,500 is just slightly above the minimum wage? Okay. Of course, overall, if you compare not just fresh grads, overall, higher education does give you a better salary, almost twice compared to workers who just have secondary education. However, as you mentioned earlier, we have unemployment and underemployment as well. So unemployed graduates in 2021, which the figure is announced in July 2022. So we have about 197,000 graduates who are unemployed, almost 200,000. That's a huge number. We're talking underemployment. That's also a big problem.
Mm.
Underemployment has two facets, if you like. Time based, which is they are not working as many hours as they would like. So we have about 130,000
Mm.
workers with graduates degree, I mean with higher education. We have about 1.6 million who are suffering what we call skill-related underemployment, meaning, as you said, underutilizing their skills, working in jobs which are not really related, or maximizing the skill set they acquire and the knowledge they acquire in university. So this is a big problem. And I know one thing that sometimes people like to mention, oh, graduates don't have to earn salary, they can start a business. Well, we also know from Kementerian Pendidikan tracer study that for graduate who started what they call menjalankan business, right? The
Mhm.
average income is only actually 1,500 ringgit a month. So this is something that economy rakyat highlighted, as well as Dr. Nung Sari highlighted. So this is a big problem.
Right. Well, the paper that you wrote put forth some policy recommendations, and I would like to kind of get into some of those things because it feels like this is a ticking time bomb that, unless addressed, might present some serious systemic issues to an entire generation of Malaysians. Talk us through some of the policy recommendations that you think needs to be considered.
Right. I think we need to divide them into current borrowers and future borrowers to talk about this issue of student loan debt. So for current or outstanding borrowers, I think maybe it's time for us to discuss about targeted and partial debt forgiveness as done in the United States recently. It's a historic move by President Biden. It has never been done on this scale, in which they forgive 10,000 ringgit and up to 20,000 ringgit for Pell Grant, low income families, because they realize that and they acknowledge that the risk that some borrowers are taking to financial education is not paying off. In fact, is penalizing them for long term.
Mm.
So it's something that perhaps we should consider. Number two, perhaps we should consider income driven repayment with the right amount of threshold, meaning that if they don't earn above a certain income, they shouldn't need to pay. This is currently absent in PTPN. PTPN only have, like, after you graduate, we give you a 1 year grace period. After that, you should start paying no matter what's your income. Of course, individually, the PTPN allows for case by case negotiation, which is something good. I think I would like to give credit to PTPN for not being too harsh, because they are not a bank. They should not be run like a commercial bank, despite what other people have said. Um, Number two is about the right tiering. As in, if you earn higher income, you should pay more percentage of your salary, but not too high. I think Pakatan Harapan tried to do this in the budget
Mm.
2019, but it was shelved because I think their threshold and their tiering is too drastic. So for future borrowers, I think maybe we should consider not resorting to loans for everybody. We know from data, we as in not just us researchers but also PTPTN, they know that B40 have a higher risk, much higher risk at defaulting. So why not we consider perhaps providing direct subsidy for B40 students? maybe we don't provide loans for them. We provide direct subsidy for their tuition fees at least. So that's something to be considered. Number two, I think we should consider setting up automatic lifelong education savings account. Set up at birth automatically for Malaysia-born children or Malaysian children born overseas. I
Right,
think
so
it's
like an EPF account, like a retirement savings account, but an education savings account.
Yep. For and lifelong education savings account, because I think it's not just about degrees nowadays. No, maybe some jobs don't require a degree. TVET or micro credentials, right? If you want
Mm.
to upskill or reskill at a certain point, you can withdraw from that fund. I think we can combine features from, let's say, EPF or Adam, Dimaplo, SSPN, which is currently PTPTN is emphasizing on that. Credit to them. I think they realize that loan is not the way to go. They are trying to pivot to encouraging more savings.
Mm. Can I ask you the current ways in which Malaysia, some policymakers, some decision makers have dealt with student loan forgiveness or deferment of payments? I think during the pandemic we saw under the Pemerkasa package there was a loan, a PTPN repayment deferment, and then there seems to be now if you graduate a certain results, you might get loan forgiveness, or your loans might be reduced. How does that work? Is that the way to be thinking about the issue of student loan debt?
I think that's regressive for the reason that if you obtain first class honors, we know
Mm.
from academic studies, number one, you tend to come from affluent families. That's why meritocracy and so on. Number two, if you have first class honors, if your CGPA is 4 flat, you're gonna probably get a good job with high paying salary. So the problem is not with this group of borrowers, right? Yet
Mm.
we have incentive which basically forgive debts
Mm.
for these borrowers. We're talking about billions here, right? Millions and billions. So I think we should, for PTPTN or student loan or higher education financing, we should identify which segment of people are we trying to help here. You're not helping the right group of people when you say, if you can settle your loan in one lump sum, you get 10%, right? Of course, it helps PTPTN with the loan recollection, but you're not helping the people who are in need of help because, well, they don't have money to pay their monthly repayment anyway. You're gonna ask them to pay 50,000 and you get 10% discount. They're not gonna have money for that. So that's a problem right there. You're not helping the right group of people. And also recently, I think the Prime Minister announced also, right? Prime Minister Ismail Sabri, he announced first class, irrespective of B40, M40, and T20.
So, in the couple of minutes that we have left, you mentioned the US a couple of times, and I know the student debt issue there is far more complex. It has a lot of political and economic implications. It was also the platform for some of the presidential candidates' campaigns in 2020. We are in the cusp of a general election now. I do want to ask you how the issue of student debt has been dealt in previous campaigns. How much might it be now? You pointed to the 18-year-olds being able to vote, the automatic voter registration. Is what you're seeing politicians being clued in, being plugged into the issue, the seriousness of student loan debt?
Yeah, I think so. I think this will be an issue in G15. You have PKR Vice President Nick Nazmi has repeatedly mentioned about student loan debt issue in the Dewan Rakyat, as well as Nurul Izzanur. UMNO President Dr. Ahmad Zahid Hamidi has also mentioned that the government should consider creating a special scheme to help PTPTN borrowers who are struggling financially. Muda President Syed Saddiq has mentioned that what he termed as gaji bermaruah to help graduates accumulating huge debt and yet are not getting the right jobs and salary that they deserve. Um, I think that this will be an issue in G15, just like in the previous two election cycles. Credit to student activists from Solidarity Mahasiswa Malaysia and Gerakan Menuntut Pendidikan Percuma. These student activists actually turning into make student debt an issue in G13, and then competing coalitions actually offer policy solutions in 2013 and 2018 elections. So I think it's going to be an issue. I think competing coalition is going to offer policy ideas in their manifesto to address student loan debt, but it's a matter of are they in tune with what's going on with student loan debt in Malaysia and elsewhere? What other countries and government have been trying to do? What innovative policy solutions can they offer? I think this is an important step. And I think I would like to perhaps end by reminding these policymaker and manifesto crafters that you have about 6 million new voters. Probably half of them are affected by student loans and student debt. A survey by AOD and Undi 18 showed that 41% of youth surveyed, they want to vote, but they are not sure yet which party they want to vote. So if you want to win the hearts and minds of these new voters, please pay attention and offer innovative policy solutions about student loan debt.
Kok Him, thank you so much for speaking with me today. That was my conversation with Ui Kok Him from the Centre, and that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.